A big round of applause for the lightning round winners. Now I'd like to welcome you to the exciting sessions this afternoon on software-defined infrastructure management. I'm Atul Garg, and I'm honored to invite the panelists from BMC, VMware, and AppDynamics to come on the stage. And these panelists will share their perspective on how do you manage this infrastructure and how it's a big data problem or not, like Steve Harrod talked about. So I'd also like to introduce Ajay Singh and invite him to be the moderator, to moderate this panel on use cases and technologies. Ajay is an entrepreneur and business leader. He's the CEO of Elastic Intelligence that offers platform as a service to connect in the cloud. Ajay.
With my esteemed panelists, do a quick round of introductions, and then really break this panel into two sets of questions or discussion topics. One is around SDIM, which is really software-defined infrastructure management. The focus here is on management, overview and use cases, and then we'll talk about technologies and trends with a real focus around where are opportunities or where are the white spaces for startups to have exciting opportunities to work around. But before we do that, a quick round of introductions.
Hi, my name is Shekar Ayyar. I run strategy and corporate development at VMware. And most of you know VMware as a virtualization company, and I think more recently we've started looking at the concept of a complete software-defined data center. So that's where a lot of the focus right now is on. And obviously a big part of that is figuring out how to manage that infrastructure underneath. And so looking forward to this panel. And just as a note, I can't see any of you with this blinding light. So.
Hi, Behnia. I'm the CTO for BMC Software. BMC is one of the largest pure play management companies, and we've been very active in the cloud space, particularly in the hybrid cloud space. So we bring a perspective that's vendor agnostic when it comes to cloud.
I'm Jyoti Bansal. I'm founder and CEO of AppDynamics. AppDynamics is, we are a startup based out of San Francisco. We are about 5-year-old, 250 people. What we do is application performance management instrumentation for distributed cloud-based applications. We have about 700 customers, and customers are companies like Netflix.com or Priceline or Staples or Walgreens or JP Morgan Chase, people who are developing large-scale applications on a private cloud or a public cloud kind of environment. What the perspective that I'm going to take today is about, how do you have to use application context to define and manage a lot of the software-defined infrastructure.
Great. So welcome, panelist members. So let's kick the discussion off with maybe if we could go around saying what is software-defined infrastructure management, your perspective. We obviously heard Steve talk about that in the keynote, but maybe Shekar, if you could kick that off, that'd be great.
Sure. Again, I think the idea behind the whole notion of software defined is that you can dynamically and in an agile way provision infrastructure, which was always very difficult to do when you had to place an order for some piece of hardware that would take forever to get there and then to be actually provisioned. So I think the notion is very powerful. We are obviously kind of in the beginning stages in some ways in order to make all of that real. I think there are elements of that. As an example, you can get a VM pretty quickly. That's everybody can do that now. I think the notion of provisioning an underlying network quickly, attaching storage to it very quickly, and then managing this entire system with that same level of agility, I think to me that is where the challenge is. Now, of course, the demands on the other side are things like cost, speed, there are things like compliance. So there are several areas where different C-level officers within the company are concerned with. So the question is really whether you can do all of this while you stay within the boundary constraints of what the rest of your organization wants to do. So
my perspective is similar. I would add just a couple of things. I think that a big part of the software-defined craze, if you will, has to do with the application and services that it runs. So the infrastructure, most people don't buy infrastructure for the sake of infrastructure. And that's very important as you look at the architecture of what needs to be managed. So it's not just about the flexible infrastructure, but the applications and business services that run on it. I think one other aspect that is unique with a lot of this is not just the dynamic aspects of it, but also the fact that it's programmable. And that's something that in the management discipline we've never had. We've always been managing hardwired systems or more agile but closed systems. The ability to actually take advantage of the programmability and in real time be able to prevent things rather than just having management be, how do you deal with problems, gives an unprecedented platform for us to develop new innovations, new products.
I would agree with Kia here. The primary difference is the programmability that's happening in software-defined infrastructure and how do you manage that. Software-defined infrastructure is really about how do you call an API or press a button with some software to get more infrastructure. But the primary driver for that is you don't get infrastructure just for the sake of infrastructure. It's some application, some services. And why do you need, so what you have to look at, the shift that's happening in the application world, which is, from DevOps to Azure development to highly distributed service-oriented kind of architectures, that the applications are changing and they can use and they are putting the demand on software-defined programmable infrastructure. So from a management perspective, almost every part of how do you, what is management? Management is about how do you keep your applications and services up and running in that infrastructure. So the management discipline that was built about how you keep your applications up and running, how do you provide the right user experience, how do you make sure availability is high, how do you make sure performance is high, how do you deploy things rapidly, how do you maintain agility, all of those things have to be redefined for since the infrastructure layer is completely changing.
So actually that brings a great start, Jyoti, to the next topic, which is around how is management different from the old hardwired days where we had silos and we managed our individual silos and mostly for up-down, to kind of the new world where it's all going in the direction of all integrated. Maybe it's not fully there yet, but it's heading in that direction. What does that mean from a management standpoint, and what are the challenges that bring forth from that?
The things that from the management perspective, the primary challenge that happens now is the rate of change is so high. If you look at Facebook.com, it's a new release is pushed in production every day. It cannot happen if your infrastructure is not flexible, if your infrastructure is not dynamic behind it, right? So if you look at an environment where there are more than 1 billion users and a new code push happens every day in production, how do you make sure everything runs smoothly? So the management discipline, which was built for many years, the concept of things like ITIL or CMDB, all of those are obsolete now. The management disciplines around more DevOps, more automation, more big data driven, that you have to have real-time data that you drive automation with. That's where the management discipline has to change versus the kind of the static nature of management where you'll have the management discipline in the past was about operational controls and processes. Which you will have controls and processes, ITIL framework was built around that, and the notion of CMDB was built around that. That's starting to completely change. Now instead of operational control and processes, you want to move to more of a real-time nature, that you instrument everything, you have data about everything, you look at the data and make real-time dynamic decisions, and that's really where management completely changes.
Great. Kia, I would love for you to weigh in
So
on that.
I will take a different approach. I think that there are certain set of things that don't change, but they need to evolve. Obviously, this is not about taking the legacy static CMDB and applying it, but whether you call it a CMDB or not, you still need a single source of truth of how your servers are configured. Otherwise, you won't pass your auditor's test of demonstrating controls. It's about how do you do those things in a much more automated way, and the answer to that is by leveraging a policy-based system so that you put your controls around the policies that you roll out to the environment as opposed to each and every instance of that policy being invoked. So we're moving from a task-based system where a lot of the management tools were designed to replicate what people did, to much more of a model and a policy-driven model where you can have a desired state, say this is basically what good looks like. I want to add a push-a-button, be able to change not just the configurations, but what I monitor on a service, and then have the systems of records basically be updated behind the scenes.
Shekar, any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think it's been largely covered, but I would say that the way management differs is I think it is a more difficult problem to design management for the portability as well as the distributed nature of the workloads themselves, right? So I think you now have a somewhat flexible infrastructure underneath because of the software definition, and where you had a very contained environment that you were managing in the past, now it's a lot more open in that sense. So I think to even Kia's point, I think the notions of compliance, et cetera, now become a lot more rigorous. I mean, if you do have policies, what are those policies, and then where do you apply them? So these are all interesting problems that need to get solved.
Right. So what does it do, Kia or Jyoti, any of you, to the classic management disciplines? You know, we used to talk about fault management, you know, service management. I mean, all the different disciplines. What does it do to those disciplines?
I'll give you an example of capacity management, right, which is part of capacity planning, which has been part of classic management discipline. So, you know, one of our customers at AppDynamics, Netflix. Netflix used to have a 6-people capacity planning team before they moved into the Amazon EC2 environment. And now they have one person in capacity planning, and that person is in the finance department. So if you look at the management discipline, it's the capacity management discipline, capacity planning discipline. Instead of IT doing capacity planning is a financial discipline now. So it's a very, very major shift that's happening in how management discipline changes. The management discipline is about how you're responsive to real-time nature of things. Kia talked a bit about the source of truth. What's your source of truth? What's your systems of record? The source of truth and systems of record are so dynamic now. They're changing changing on order of minutes now, and not order of months. So it's the challenge from traditional management perspective is how do you keep the source of truth a real source of truth, and that's where it becomes more of a configuration source of truth to more of a big data driven, real time instrumentation driven source of truth, and everything has to be built on top of that. Your fault management, capacity management, scaling management, performance management, all the management disciplines have to be built on top of that. That's how we look at it.
So I would add, if you actually look at what you need to manage, it used to be management focus was how do I basically cover each of the towers and have an enterprise console that brings everything together. Now we're talking in the new world around an infrastructure that's changing, applications that are being modified, and also the fact that some of the services you rely on are assets that you don't control. So you still have to monitor, manage, provision, even look at the user experience across a wide variety of sources, all of which you can instrument and monitor.
Right.
So, it actually requires you to rethink the problem so that instead of starting with agents and deep dive technology and, perfectly normalized systems, to actually look at it, tops down. What is the decisions I'm trying to make? How much data do I need to make those decisions? What's the best source to get that data? Is it real time? Is it big data? Is it, wherever it comes from? So it is one of those things that opens the, levels the playing field in many ways, because nobody can deploy an agent into Salesforce.com or Force.com platform. Now you can get metrics around it, but that metrics are at a very low level, and you have to, augment it with the application data that you collect.
That's a great point. So is it fair to say that the rate of change and the flexibility and the agility that the software-defined infrastructure provides starts to kind of collapse the traditional FCAPS model, just because it can't survive in the individual silos, and they need to kind of interoperate. And when you start to collapse it, the data flow from each of the all the components makes it a big data problem to some extent. Because you have so much information from all the components, the fault information, the performance information, capacity, configuration, to be able to handle all of that at the same time.
Look, the analogy I use is you can have a very fast car, but that fast car better have good brakes. And I've always seen management and infrastructure, or the agility and infrastructure, working together. A few years back, I remember meeting with Steve and Steve Harrod, and we were talking about DRS, and there were customers who thought that DRS would, have them fail their compliance exams, and oh my God, it's autopilot, and we all lived, and people are happily using that technology. I think there's a degree to which, if you take it to the extreme, things happen randomly and it's automated, et cetera. The reality is, in most businesses, they like the flexibility that software-defined brings them, but not all businesses change all the time.
Right.
So I view these two things, two knobs, if you will, compensating for each other. Now, if the management is not flexible, it's not enable you to take advantage of that, then it becomes the barrier to adoption to software-defined.
That's a great point.
Yeah. So the one thing I would add to that is, if you look at the role of developers in management, that's another fundamental shift that's happening. It used to be that management is done by ops. It's completely done by ops, and the developers are not involved. Once you get a programmable infrastructure, you get EC2 API that you can call the API and get machines. You can get storage. Now you start shifting the balance of power a lot to the developers. The developers can do things. They can build applications that can use in their code. They can use software-defined infrastructure. They can call those APIs, and they can scale up, scale down their application. They can do things to use the programmable nature of the infrastructure. So what that changes from a management perspective, that's where you see the shift from kind of your siloed dev and ops to the more DevOps. And that's if you look at people like Facebook and Google, a lot of the operational discipline is becoming programmable as well. So it's not just the infrastructure. Mm-hmm. How do you do management is getting coded in the application stack and getting built in the application stacks. So that also makes a big shift in the, as your applications changes quickly, your code changes quickly, developers have to build some of the management and operational abilities in the code itself as well.
Actually, Shekar was wondering if you had any thoughts on that particular idea, given that VMware kind of advocates that management over time is going to just get embedded in.
Yeah, well, I think there's a little bit of pendulum swinging, right? I think certainly we see also the importance of the developer. In fact, we've kind of closely partnered with a company called Puppet Labs in that space, in DevOps. But I think the idea of the CIO and sort of some of the things that they worry about, I don't think those ever go away, right? So I do think that there's probably some level of democratization, some level of get me something quick, and have the developers have control of certain things that they can, in fact. For example, I think analytics is a great tool where if you can provide visibility in terms of whatever it is that user of the management tool would see, and that gives them what they want to do as a job, I think that's fantastic. And to me, all the management tools should be aspiring to do that. But if they don't have the right level of security and controls underneath that allow them to, in fact, do what they might need to do in a regulated industry, as an example, then I think that defeats the purpose. Right? That's right. So I don't kind of, I'm definitely a blend, right? I think in the notion of looking at it as a hybrid cloud, in the notion of looking at it as application and infrastructure coming closer together, I actually don't think you can ignore either extreme. You really have to know that there are more stakeholders there are changing roles, there are people who are kind of blending in terms of what they're doing. Somebody who used to originally be a server admin slowly became a kind of virtualization admin. We're seeing more and more people now have a cloud admin-like functionality where they are doing a little bit of networking, a little bit of storage. Right. So I think the management tooling does need to morph to service all these, the requirements of these people. But it doesn't fundamentally take away the notions of what you need to do from a security and compliance perspective.
So that's an excellent point. I think Kia said it very well. The reality is that not all infrastructure is changed by the minute, and there's the real world out there beyond kind of the pure online shops that one has to kind of deal with. So I'd like to move to the second part of the discussion here around technologies and trends, and the objective here is to really sort of paint a little bit of a landscape of what's out there, with kind of the idea of trying to see what the white spaces are for entrepreneurs to potentially exploit some niches that make sense. So let's kind of kick it off, just kind of painting the landscape a little bit around who do we think are the key industry player, the key technologies that we see are emerging that that an entrepreneur can kind of against this landscape kind of exploit an opportunity. Kia, you want to?
Yeah, so I'll start out. I think, so clearly they're the infrastructure vendors, and again, as you're looking at which infrastructure vendors to partner with, you look at who are the people who are investing now on more programmable, code. Who's opening up their APIs and making it easier for people to build the ecosystem around. They typically tend to be driving that mindset and capability. They're the management vendors, some of which are investing in the space and some of which are, quite frankly, trying to figure out what their strategy is. I think we're very close to seeing a much greater difference between vendors who are leading the charge versus the followers. And for those of you who are entrepreneurs, that gives you a lot of opportunities. There's going to be a lot of shoppers in this space in 2-3 years, for sure. And then there's a lot of focused company startups in the application side of the house, the DevOps process side of the house, the infrastructure side of the house. I think, as Steve talked about, I think storage is the next logical thing in terms of the most immediate area. But a lot of these environments don't have a lot of standards, which gives an opportunity for new innovators to help drive some of the standardization that needs to take place.
Okay, great. Shekar, anything you want to add to technologies and players?
Well, I think from an opportunity standpoint, management is one of these things which Kia will vouch that you could have companies trying to do it for the longest time, but we never get it completely right.
Yeah.
So I think that there is always, for example, I think there is a good amount of tooling that is needed just in terms of getting orchestration done right. And I think each one of us has our own way of doing it, but there are still sort of gaps that need to get addressed overall as you think about a wider connected environment, a more diverse and hybrid environment. I think the reality is that the complex use cases are not quite there yet. I think most people still do simple stuff in terms of using private and public clouds. In terms of big data and analytics, I actually think that is definitely an area of opportunity because, like logs, for example, is a classic area where the more logs you get, the more you can consume and the more you can kind of report out, and then there are a bunch of companies that are building a business out of providing that as a platform for people to build on top of. I do think that the areas around kind of security and compliance will be another aspect of it that people would find the right ways to insert the right levels of control in this new world when these things start getting blended together. And we see a number of people starting to do things as startups or as the community outside us. I think the good news is that big companies cannot innovate on all fronts all the time. So there is always going to be that opportunity. So.
Yes, from as an entrepreneur in the management space, it's a very good space for entrepreneurs to come and drive some innovation. It's IT operations management, according to Gartner, was $20 billion a year of spending last year. So if you think about it, it's a pretty massive space, which is going through a major transformation as the management changes, as infrastructure changes, as applications change. If you have major shift in infrastructure, you have major shift in applications, you have to put in a major shift in the management stack as well. So right now is a great opportunity to bring innovations in the IT operations management space. The areas are, you have to make sure that in the new world of software-defined infrastructure, more these applications running on software-defined infrastructure, that the applications perform well, they're secure, they're available, they're very agile, because that's really what driving a lot of the why people want software-defined infrastructure. That businesses want agility, business wants speed of innovation, they want time to market faster, they want good user experience. So if you can have innovative solutions to help businesses do that, there's a lot of opportunity.
That's a great point. But a little bit on the technologies and trends. What do we feel like? There's sort of different competing standards coming out there, which have opportunities for entrepreneurs. Because some of those areas might be underserved. So there, areas like OpenStack, versus CloudStack and AWS. Is there one particular area that maybe is not that well served by the larger vendors that maybe a startup could have an opportunity in?
My opinion on standards is that the market this market is changing so rapidly. There's so much innovation happening that it's too soon for standardization. Standardization slows down innovation most of the times. So it's too soon for too much standardization. It hasn't happened, right? I would like more and more vendors to come in. AWS, you have AWS, you have Google Compute now, you have Microsoft Azure, you should have CloudStack, OpenStack. It's the more innovation that happens, that's better for everyone. That's more innovation on software-defined compute, on software-defined networks, software-defined storage, everything. And now, the management, the challenge from a management perspective is that there are two ways to do management. Either wait for everything is standardized API, and you build a standardized management layer on top of it. Standardization is not going to happen too soon. From a management perspective, you have to work in a heterogeneous environment. That's where I see the since the dynamic of this market is changing so rapidly, it's becoming more heterogeneous than before. Instead of waiting for standardization, I would recommend people to adopt heterogeneity and build management around that.
So I have, again, a slightly different perspective. I agree with what Larry Page said at the I/O conference earlier this week, for those of you who followed it, which he said too much of our tech industry is trying to pick vendor A versus vendor B. And I think the overall opportunity that this possesses is far greater than what any vendor can do in having what hurts us in having some standards around interoperability. Now, that doesn't mean picking a winner. It means that majority of customers want choice. Majority of us as vendors want to not have engineering teams that are building completely different interfaces between VMware, OpenStack, CloudStack, and Amazon. That's not innovation, right? The end customer doesn't get any more new functionality. So I just hope for the day, and BMC's been very active in standards, and we continue to be, that our management industry learns a lesson from the hardware industry, where you come up with a USB standard, you compete on keyboards and mice, not on whether FireWire or USB is the right standard. And I don't know if that day comes, so until that day comes, I agree with him that says you got to design for heterogeneity, because that's what the world's going to be like.
And actually, I think Jyoti brought an excellent point earlier on. If you look at the history of management products, I mean, anytime there was a significant shift in the infrastructure, so for example, when app servers started to get deployed in a big way, companies like Wiley took off. When network, the modern network, IP-based networking took off, companies like Network General and a whole bunch of companies, Concord and Communication, et cetera, they all took off on this new infrastructure that was being rolled out. And to some extent, we have new infrastructure that is starting to now, roll out here. And that creates opportunities for startups and new big plays to start to happen. So to that extent, from an early adopter standpoint for this new infrastructure and the management solution around that, where do we feel the early adopters would be for this kind of a technology?
So it starts where the early adopters of software-defined infrastructure.
Yes.
So adopters of software-defined infrastructure management are would just follow that. If you look at where software-defined infrastructure is getting used, starts from your public cloud environments. That's the first major version of software-defined infrastructure, right? You call an API on EC2 and you get infrastructure. If you look at adopters, EC2 started with major adoption in the startup community, major adoption, and it's starting to get significantly in traditional enterprise now. You will see traditional retail shops, traditional some of the insurance companies even starting to look at are there applications that they can push into a public cloud. So that's the first part. The second part is the people who have a sort of a private cloud infrastructure built on VMware or Eucalyptus or OpenStack that people are starting to adopt in large banks, large telcos, large in sort of your traditional Fortune 2000 enterprise. We are still early on it, but people are starting to look at it very seriously. So it's that's definitely an opportunity. From a management perspective, the service providers and telcos are another opportunity, because these guys are building a software-defined infrastructure and offering offering either infrastructure services or platform services on top of that. So that's definitely an early adopter opportunity as well.
Yeah, I would say I'd probably reverse the trend a little bit, because I think just given sort of where we've grown up in VMware, we've seen a lot of action inside the private cloud in terms of people that are upgrading their infrastructure for various things, like kind of replatforming for new applications, consolidation, connecting to the public cloud. And I'm actually going to dispute that a little bit in the sense that I think the innovation, in fact, comes more from the inside the enterprise clouds. I think the public cloud innovation is done by a handful of service providers that are actually deploying these stacks, but pretty much every enterprise, I mean, for example, right, every large bank, every large retailer, every large car manufacturer is all thinking about how do you provide the same levels of agility inside your enterprise as they are used to getting from some service provider like Amazon most typically. And that is causing them to find out what they need to do differently in their own infrastructure to enable that. Because I think to the earlier point I made, I think there's a little bit, I mean, there's a good amount of tension actually inside the corporations in terms of somebody who might be a developer or a line of business user coming and saying, if you don't give me this within whatever, this many hours or this many minutes, I'm going outside to get it from somewhere else. So that challenge is in fact now posed where they are starting to find out what is it that they can do to innovate. I actually think that it takes different forms. So there's a greenfield form to that, and we've got a bunch of customers that are doing that. There are setting up separate software-defined data centers that allow for this to happen. There are others that are upgrading their infrastructure. There's a brownfield deployment notion to that. But I think all of those people, not surprisingly, financial institutions being at the lead of that, are figuring out how they need to innovate to use these different environments that are available. So.
That's excellent. So just a follow-on question on that. Is that, on the enterprise side, is that action more at the line of business level that's kind of building these apps, or is it more at the classic data center? Where is it?
Yeah, so the line of business is necessarily the catalyst, right?
Yes.
I think the line of business is basically the one that is, in fact, promoting the thinking here, because frankly, if that didn't exist, maybe they would drag their feet and take much longer to do what they're doing. But I think the service provider now internally becomes the IT organization. So they do need to rise to that to make sure that their own infrastructure is agile, that they can, because candidly, I think until, I mean, probably for a few years now or a few years hence, I don't know that you will have the same level of cross-cloud compliance that you can certify your own infrastructure to. I mean, you might be able to take a single vendor outside and be happy and satisfied, but I think once you start kind of blending different things, it becomes more complicated. So that's why I think the line of business is certainly kind of spurring this innovation, and they're asking for things that have never been asked before.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Shekar. Thank you, Kia. Thank you, Jyoti. Really appreciate the discussion. I hope you got something out of it. So thank you again to my esteemed panelists.